about how difficult life was for me at that time, because I was 23 and had many questions, and I was very...
Roger Hodgson, the voice behind Supertramp's biggest hits, has shocked fans by revealing the truth about his past with Rick Davies. A hidden conflict between them led to Hodgson leaving the band. At 74, Roger finally speaks about the heartbreak and struggles that ended their partnership. Join us as we uncover what happened between these bandmates. In August 1969, a young keyboard player named Rick Davies, who came from a working-class background, placed an advertisement in Melody Maker magazine searching for musicians to join a band. A Dutch millionaire named Stanley August Miesegees, also known as Sam, believed in Davies' musical vision and provided financial support. The ad caught the attention of Roger Hodgson, a musician from Portsmouth with a middle-class background. Hodgson later recalled that he was one of around 250 musicians who auditioned for the band. When he met Davies, they immediately got along. They spent time together at a pub where Davies entertained him with jokes for an hour. However, it was not just their personalities that clicked. There was also a strong musical connection between them. Despite coming from different backgrounds, Davies and Hodgson bonded over their love for music. Davies was deeply passionate about blues and jazz, while Hodgson leaned more toward pop music. Their shared enthusiasm led to the formation of a band that included bassist Dougie Thompson, drummer Bob Siebenberg, and saxophonist John Helliwell. Together, they created what would later be recognized as the classic lineup of Supertramp. However, success did not come easily. Their first two albums, released in 1970 and 1971, did not perform well. The combined sales of both albums barely reached 50,000 copies. By 1972, Miesegees withdrew his financial support, leaving the band in a difficult situation. They were left with approximately $100,000 in debt from equipment expenses and an uncertain future. It seemed like the end of their journey, but a lifeline appeared when A&M Records gave them another chance. The record label offered them a small survival salary and rented an old farmhouse in Somerset, England, where the band members could live together with their families. The farmhouse became a communal space where the 5 musicians, along with their wives, girlfriends, children, and pets, shared everything. They combined their limited resources to buy groceries, cook together, and dedicated almost all their time to music. Their daily routine involved gathering for breakfast in the large kitchen before heading to the converted barn, where they spent 8 to 10 hours rehearsing. Even in the evenings, their conversations revolved around music as they ate together. Their different musical styles contributed to a unique creative process. Davies often came up with melodic piano pieces influenced by blues and jazz, while Hodgson brought in folk elements and deep, thought-provoking lyrics. Despite not being close friends outside of music, their collaboration worked effortlessly. Davies would play something on the piano, and Hodgson would instinctively know how to complement it with his guitar and distinctive voice. This strong creative bond, fueled by their financial struggles and the close environment they lived in, played a key role in shaping the music for their next 3 albums. Their big break came in 1974 with the release of Crime of the Century, which featured the hit song Dreamer and a haunting title track. This success was followed by 2 more albums, Crisis, What Crisis, in 1975, and Even in the Quietest Moments in 1977. The latter included their first major hit in the United States, Give a Little Bit. Though they were still working their way up in the rock music scene, the band made a decision that would later become a major issue. They signed a royalty-sharing agreement, giving 27% each to the 2 main songwriters, Davies and Hodgson, while the remaining 3 band members and their manager each received 11.5%. This arrangement acknowledged the songwriting contributions while also recognizing the role of the other members in shaping the band's sound. While some, like drummer Bob Siebenberg, believed this agreement was meant to last permanently, Hodgson had a different perspective. He saw it as a temporary solution during their financial difficulties. This fundamental disagreement about the agreement's terms would eventually lead to legal battles years later. Just as the band finalized this deal, their fortunes took a dramatic turn. They went from being relatively unknown to selling 20 million albums in a single year, a transformation that changed everything. Supertramp's journey from struggling musicians to multimillionaires took an unexpected turn when they began recording in an unusual location, a Masonic temple that would play a crucial role in both their greatest success and the cracks that eventually formed within the band. In 1978, the group moved to Los Angeles to begin work on what would become their most famous album, Breakfast in America. Their recording space was Studio B at the Village Recorder, which was set inside a repurposed Masonic temple. The studio featured advanced recording equipment, including a 48-channel Harrison console and 2 AEX track machines. The building's unique design allowed each band member to have a separate space while recording. Bob Siebenberg's drums were set up against the left wall, Rick Davies played his clavinet on the right, and Roger Hodgson's Wurlitzer was placed inside the drum booth. Meanwhile, John Helliwell played his saxophone in an unusual location, the bathroom. The process of creating Breakfast in America was divided into 2 distinct phases. The first involved recording the backing tracks, with all 5 band members playing together live to capture their signature chemistry. This part of the process took about 4 weeks. However, the next stage was unlike anything they had done before. For the next 7 months, they meticulously recorded layer after layer of additional sound, refining every detail to perfection. Their typical work schedule ran from 2 p.m. to 11 p.m. Monday through Friday. While this painstaking approach resulted in an album with incredible sound quality, it also highlighted the growing tensions between the band members. One of the clearest signs of trouble was Roger Hodgson's increasing isolation. He became so focused on perfecting the album that he moved into a motorhome parked in the studio's lot, where he lived for months. He worked long hours every day, completely consumed by the process. This physical distance from the rest of the band reflected the emotional separation that was beginning to develop between the 2 main songwriters. At the same time, life in California was changing the band members in other ways. As recording continued, they each purchased homes across the state, creating more distance between them. John Helliwell, for example, bought a luxurious hillside home in Topanga Canyon for $239,000, a price nearly 10 times higher than the average middle-class home in the area. Since they no longer lived together as they once had, their bond outside of the studio weakened. The physical separation of their homes, sometimes more than 50 miles apart, only added to the growing emotional distance within the group. Despite these underlying tensions, the music they created during this period was remarkable. When Breakfast in America was released in 1979, it became an instant sensation, far surpassing anyone's expectations. The album sold over 20 million copies worldwide, generating more than $100 million in revenue. This sudden and massive success transformed 5 struggling musicians into extremely wealthy men almost overnight. The album dominated radio stations with 4 hit singles: the logical song, Goodbye Stranger, Take the Long Way Home, and the title track, Breakfast in America. However, the same attention to perfection that had contributed to their commercial success also intensified the issues within the band. The royalty agreement they had signed back in 1977 now became far more significant than they had ever imagined. What once seemed like a fair way to divide modest earnings was now the basis for splitting millions of dollars. The sudden explosion of success changed everything, making the cracks within the band even more obvious. While fans filled stadiums to witness 5 musicians performing together in perfect harmony, a completely different reality was unfolding behind the scenes. What the audience saw and what was really happening couldn't have been more different. The Breakfast in America tour was a massive operation, requiring 52 tons of equipment, 10 miles of cable, and $5 million worth of gear. A crew of 40 people worked tirelessly to ensure everything ran smoothly. This was not just a band touring, it had become a large-scale business, moving from city to city with military-like efficiency. However, as the production grew bigger, the bond between the band members grew weaker. They no longer traveled together. Roger Hodgson chose to journey in a caravan with his partner, while the rest of the band flew from one city to another. This decision to travel separately reflected deeper divisions forming within the group. The distance between them was not just physical. Small tensions that had surfaced during the album's recording now became obvious during the tour. Rick Davies made a decision to ban substance use in his presence, which many believed was aimed directly at Hodgson due to his known lifestyle choices. Bassist Dougie Thompson summed up the situation by explaining that the tour had a negative impact on the band's relationships, both as musicians and as friends. By the time the tour neared its end, the band members only spent time together during their performances. Outside of those 2 hours on stage, they avoided each other as much as possible. What made it even more unusual was that the audience never suspected a thing. Night after night, Supertramp delivered flawless performances that showed no sign of the tension brewing backstage. Even though they barely spoke to one another offstage, their musical connection remained strong. But this growing detachment had a profound effect on Hodgson. He felt disheartened by the entire experience and began to see their performances differently. It felt less like a shared passion and more like a repetitive routine. He no longer felt the same excitement about performing and started to view the band as being trapped in a massive machine. The irony of the situation was that as their relationships fell apart, their commercial success soared to new heights. The tour broke attendance records across Europe and North America. From an outsider's perspective, Supertramp seemed to be at the peak of their career. However, instead of bringing them closer, success only pushed them further apart. The days when they had struggled together in a small farmhouse were gone, replaced by a lifestyle where each member lived comfortably on their own. Their creative partnership had become a business, controlled by contracts and financial agreements. Money, which had once been a reward for their hard work, had now turned them from close collaborators into distant business associates. By the end of the tour, the fractures within the band had deepened, and returning to the studio did nothing to repair them. Fans eagerly awaited their next album, but behind closed doors, the band faced an impossible challenge, creating new music while their two leaders could barely stand to be in the same room. What should have been a normal recording process in 1981 turned into a 16-month struggle. The sessions for Famous Last Words revealed just how broken the group had become. The creative process no longer felt natural. Instead of working together effortlessly as they once had, everything became slow and difficult. Recording often came to a complete stop. Hodgson admitted that the album was especially frustrating to make, and progress was constantly delayed. Unlike their previous albums, where a sense of teamwork always found a way through the challenges, this time there was nothing holding them together. The best songs were left unfinished, and the band could no longer function as a unit. This divide even extended to where they worked. Rick Davies set up his recording space at his home in Encino, California, while Hodgson retreated over 400 miles away to his private studio in Nevada City. The physical distance between them only emphasized what was already clear. The magic that had once defined Supertramp was fading, and nothing could bring it back. The growing distance between Roger Hodgson and Rick Davies was more than just physical. It reflected the deep, creative divide that had formed between them. Sound technician Chris Smothers Smith noticed how much things had changed when Famous Last Words was released in 1982. The atmosphere surrounding the band was completely different. The album didn't sell as well as expected, and the tension between Hodgson and Davies cast a shadow over the entire tour. The magic that once made their performances special was gone. Instead of feeling like a passionate musical journey, it had become just another job for everyone involved. The tour returned to the usual arena format, lacking the excitement and uniqueness that had once defined their shows. Despite all the internal struggles, Famous Last Words was completed and released in 1982. It achieved commercial success, reaching the top 10 in multiple countries. However, no amount of success could fix the broken relationships within the band. The title of the album unintentionally foreshadowed what was to come. These truly were the band's famous last words as the classic lineup. Then, by early 1983, Hodgson had made a firm decision. He would leave Supertramp. It was a difficult choice, but he knew it was time to step away from the band he had helped build from nothing into a worldwide sensation. His decision wasn't just about the ongoing tension with Davies. After years of constant touring and recording, he longed for a more stable life. Looking at his 2 young children, he realized he needed to step back and focus on being a parent. He knew that continuing with Supertramp wouldn't allow him to give his family the attention they deserved. Before he left, Hodgson made an agreement with Davies that would later prove to be a major mistake. He agreed to let Davies continue using the Supertramp name after his departure. At the time, it seemed like a simple and fair arrangement. Hodgson would keep the rights to the songs he had written, while Davies would carry on with the band. However, in later years, Hodgson would deeply regret this decision. He would later admit that it was one of the biggest mistakes he had ever made. What seemed like a straightforward agreement turned into a complicated situation that neither of them could have predicted. Hodgson didn't realize how much this deal would impact his future career and his ability to perform the songs that had made him famous. What started as a handshake agreement in 1983 would eventually lead to legal disputes that would last for decades. Roger Hodgson, co-founder of Supertramp, has long felt betrayed by his former bandmate Rick Davies due to a broken agreement made when Hodgson left the band in 1983. The agreement stipulated that Davies would retain the band's name while Hodgson would retain the rights to his own songs. For the first 5 years, Davies honored this arrangement, but from the late 1980s onwards, he began performing Hodgson songs in Supertramp concerts, something Hodgson saw as a deep betrayal. By 2010, the issue reached its peak when Davies led Supertramp on a tour that prominently featured Hodgson's compositions. Hodgson felt this was a direct challenge to their agreement, and it ultimately prevented any chance of a reunion. Despite reaching out multiple times, Hodgson's offers to collaborate were rejected by Davies, who reportedly felt that a reunion would benefit Hodgson more than himself. Hodgson viewed himself as the primary driving force behind Supertramp's success, with many of the band's biggest hits being his compositions. He had a strong artistic vision influenced by the Beatles and was deeply passionate about making meaningful music. In contrast, Davies had a more practical approach and was less concerned with the broader impact of their work. Their divergence extended beyond music, as Hodgson embraced a more spiritual and health-conscious lifestyle, particularly after the band moved to the US. While the rest of Supertramp focused on their musical careers, Hodgson was drawn to meditation, vegetarianism, and a more holistic way of living, which further distanced him from his bandmates. Despite feeling lonely within the band, he appreciated the sense of unity they once had, particularly during their peak years with Breakfast in America. Hodgson left the band in 1983 to focus on his family and personal life, moving to Northern California and avoiding the music industry for many years. He later pursued a solo career, but faced setbacks, including a serious injury that temporarily prevented him from playing. His frustration grew as Davies continued to tour under the Supertramp name while performing Hodgson's songs, which Hodgson believed went against their original understanding. Although Hodgson acknowledges that fans associate Supertramp with his music, he believes that Davies' decision to perform songs he once disliked undermines the integrity of their agreement. He continues to tour successfully as a solo artist, performing his own songs and finding fulfillment in connecting with his audience. Despite the long-standing dispute, he remains passionate about his music and focuses on the joy it brings to fans. As soon as the separation was finalized, both musicians began following their own paths. Even though the split had only just happened, each of them was already moving forward into the unknown. Hodgson wasted no time launching his solo career. In 1984, he released his first solo album, In the Eye of the Storm. It became his most successful solo work, selling over 2 million copies. Meanwhile, Davies kept Supertramp going with the remaining band members. At first, it seemed like both had made a clean break until some issues arose. But in 1993, something unexpected happened. Hodgson and Davies reunited for a special event. They performed together at a dinner honoring Jerry Moss, the co-founder of A&M Records. This rare reunion even led to some new creative efforts. The two musicians recorded demos for two songs, You Win, I Lose, and the Light. However, any hope of a long-term collaboration quickly faded. Disagreements over management got in the way, and the project fell apart before it had a chance to move forward. Their relationship, once built on mutual respect and musical chemistry, had become strained beyond repair. The handshake agreement they made in 1983 had been the start of a long and complicated battle that would last for decades. What had once been a brotherhood had turned into two musicians walking separate paths, forever tied together by the music they had created, but unable to truly reunite. By 2010, Rick Davies made it clear that there was no chance of a reunion. He believed that putting on a great show required not just musical harmony, but also personal understanding, and unfortunately, that no longer existed between him and Roger Hodgson. On the other hand, Hodgson seemed more open to the idea of reconciliation. He expressed his admiration for Davies' music and reflected on their years as partners, saying he had no grudges and was not the type to hold on to the past. However, any hope of working together again soon faded as life brought new challenges. In 2015, Davies was diagnosed with multiple myeloma, a serious illness that forced Supertramp to cancel their planned European tour. He shared the news with fans, explaining that his health had to come first. This unexpected turn of events served as a reminder that the years had passed quickly, and any opportunity for a reunion had slipped away while time continued moving forward. While these personal struggles unfolded, financial tensions had been building in the background for years. Back in 1977, Supertramp had made an agreement to share royalties, a decision that reflected their strong creative partnership at the time. However, as the decades passed and Hodgson was no longer in the band, the arrangement became more difficult for him to accept. What had once been a fair system when they were all working together now seemed unreasonable, especially as their careers had taken separate paths. For 41 years, Hodgson honored the agreement, but in 2018, he made a bold decision that changed everything. He stopped paying royalties to his former bandmates, Dougie Thompson, John Helliwell, and Bob Siebenberg. By doing this, he directly challenged the financial deal that had existed for decades, setting the stage for a legal battle that would mark the final chapter of their complex history. In February 2024, the tensions that had been simmering for years finally boiled over when three former members of Supertramp sued Hodgson over unpaid royalties from the 1977 agreement. They demanded $1.3 million in damages, arguing that he had stopped payments in 2018. Hodgson's lawyer defended his decision by stating that the agreement was never meant to last forever. He pointed out that there was no official document saying Hodgson was required to continue sharing his songwriting royalties indefinitely. Surprisingly, the case was resolved much faster than expected. The jury took less than an hour to reach a decision, unanimously ruling in Hodgson's favor. They determined that 41 years had been a fair amount of time for the agreement to last before coming to an end. However, the former band members were not satisfied with the outcome. Their lawyer immediately called the verdict a major mistake and announced plans to appeal, ensuring that the legal battle would continue. This lawsuit served as a powerful reminder that even the strongest creative partnerships, which once produced legendary music, could eventually fall apart over money. The journey that began with passion and artistic collaboration had now ended with legal disputes in a courtroom. Despite all the conflict, the legacy of Supertramp remained strong. Their music continued to generate significant revenue in the modern digital world. The story of Supertramp highlighted an ironic truth about success. The very thing that had brought them together, music, had also torn them apart. What started as a group of musicians creating songs out of love for their craft eventually became a business, with lawyers and financial disputes taking center stage. The band that once shared simple meals and struggled to make ends meet had become millionaires, battling over ownership rights. One of their most famous songs, the logical song, had generated approximately 120 album equivalent sales from streaming platforms in recent years, proving that their music was still loved by many. However, their journey revealed a harsh reality. While hardship had once kept them united, wealth and success had driven them apart. Looking back at everything they had accomplished, it was impossible not to wonder if things might have been different had they remained hungry for just a little longer. Perhaps they could have stayed together. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.